The morning began with the roll-up door of the test facility slowly opening, revealing a vast space filled with industrial equipment undergoing checks. White light spread evenly across the floor, reflecting off the steel plates that had been cleaned the previous night. Serafina Caldwell walked through the door with a determined stride, clutching her tablet. She didn't rely on anyone to report the situation to her, having learned over the years that only what she saw with her own eyes could be trusted. Today, Project Helios entered its most critical testing phase, and she wanted to see every detail of the operation, every minor fault, every slightest unusual change. The engineering team was already there, standing around the new sensor model. They checked the stability of the suspension system, adjusted the joints, and updated the safety checklist. Temporary staff were assigned along both sides of the testing area, responsible for both recording information and ensuring the operational zone was clear. The work atmosphere seemed professional, but Serafina still sensed that something wasn't running entirely smoothly. She kept that thought to herself and continued to observe. Not far away, Archie Flynn was simultaneously inspecting 3 stretches of wiring along the wall. He sat down across from the power box, setting his old toolbox aside. Everything in the box was wrapped in faded cloth, showing they had been used so long that they had become a part of his life. His wrists were dusted with steel grit, but every movement was careful and methodical, as if he was used to finding faults in a cluttered space. Archie reviewed his handwritten notes, comparing each symbol with the suspension system diagram taped to the wall. The small text below clearly stated, "Minor short circuit, not yet fixed." He frowned when he saw a section of wire near the crane area that was positioned incorrectly compared to the standard. No one else noticed this, but he spotted it immediately. Serafina approached the engineering team and asked them to describe the entire project process for the morning. She listened to every detail, repeated every question, emphasizing points that staff had reported vaguely. Everyone was visibly tense standing before her, but no one dared to complain. She reiterated that all parameters must be fully recorded without omitting a single detail. A few people nodded. Others hurriedly checked their data boards. The robotic crane's motor rang out as the technician controlled its startup. The control screen lit up with continuously blinking numeric columns. The lead technician reported that the suspension mechanism was functioning normally. However, on the secondary computer screen, the transmitted vibration trace showed several points outside the safety limit. The data attendant didn't notice because they were focused on observing the main joint, and so a few critical seconds passed unnoticed. Archie, standing not far away, heard an unusual sound from the suspension mechanism. He turned his head, looking up at the steel hook assembly moving in a slow trajectory. The vibration reading repeated a check request, but no one responded. Archie frowned, moving closer to get a clearer look. He realized the vibration was uneven, as if a point was looser than necessary. He looked around for the lead person, but they were focused on the central control panel.
A small warning appeared on the control panel, but the chief technician merely glanced at it and dismissed it as noise. This overconfidence caused the entire surveillance team to overlook the initial signal. The machine continued to operate, and the hanging bar was moving at its programmed speed. From Archie's perspective, things were beginning to spiral out of control. The suspension mechanism suddenly tilted. A clanking sound rang out, and the heavy steel bar was pulled off its standard position. Those standing nearby turned, noticing the abnormal movement, but no one knew how to react. They weren't sure where the fault originated and waited for the lead person to order a stop, but that person was still reviewing data on the screen. Everything happened too fast. Serafina was standing directly beneath the area where the bar was heading. She was still viewing data on her tablet and hadn't realized the danger. Archie looked up and saw the steel bar's movement was completely off course. No one had time to shout a warning. A change in the metallic sound made Serafina look up, but it was already too close. Archie immediately dropped everything in his hands and lunged forward as fast as he could. He didn't think or consider the risks. There was only one thought. He had to pull her out of that position. He used both hands to forcefully push Serafina aside, causing her to slide out of the drop zone just as the bar slid down onto the floor with a loud clang that echoed throughout the workshop. The staff rushed over in panic. Serafina stumbled to her feet, breathing heavily, as if she hadn't fully processed what had happened. When she looked down, she saw Archie lying on his side, his shoulder bleeding through his protective gear. A few staff members helped her stand steady, while the rest ran to get a first aid kit. Archie tried to lift himself up, but the pain in his shoulder made him helpless. Serafina knelt beside him and placed her hand on his shoulder to try and contain the bleeding. He managed a faint smile, but his breath was quicker than usual. She only managed a short phrase, "Stay calm." Archie did not reply, only closed his eyes to reduce the throbbing sensation. The workshop staff called an ambulance, and everyone quickly cleared a path to move him out. Serafina kept her hand on Archie's shoulder until the paramedics asked her to step back. As the stretcher was pushed out of the testing area, she stood watching, her heart still pounding, realizing that had she been even a few seconds slower, the consequences would have been unimaginable. And as the workshop door closed, the sound of the machinery inside gradually faded, leaving Serafina with a heavy feeling in her chest, along with the question that had just formed in her mind. Was this truly just a simple technical malfunction? The emergency room hallway was filled with hurried footsteps and the sound of gurney wheels rolling on the floor. Serafina walked close beside him, one hand steadying Archie's shoulder to minimize the shaking, the other pushing open doors for the medical staff. Her high-end business shirt was stained with workshop dust and faint oil smudges, but she didn't care. She only looked at the man lying on the gurney, his face pale from blood loss, but still trying to maintain composure to avoid causing more chaos. The ambulance took them to the nearest hospital. Stepping out, even before the paramedics could fully take over, Serafina asked repeatedly, "Is he all right? What needs to be checked first? How long until I sign the paperwork?" The attending physician looked at her with the familiar gaze reserved for people under extreme stress, then guided her step by step. She followed without missing a beat. In the treatment room, Archie's wound was thoroughly bandaged. Serafina stood behind the glass door, clutching the edge of her shirt, as the doctor lifted the final gauze from his shoulder. Only when he was moved to the observation room did she enter. The room was simple, white light illuminating the bandage on Archie's shoulder. He had his eyes closed, his breathing steady but still tired. Serafina pulled a chair over and sat down, placing her tablet on her lap without turning it on. For years, she had always maintained distance from her employees, positioning herself as a leader who required seriousness and control. But now, the moment she saw Archie lying among the medical equipment caused her familiar rigidity to temporarily soften. A minor accident, an error of a few seconds, and everything could have surpassed all limits. The door opened. The workshop manager and the head of the safety department walked in, their faces flush from rushing. Serafina stood up, her voice low but decisive. "Report to me." The workshop manager quickly summarized the situation, but within a few sentences, she realized they didn't grasp the full scope of the event. "Check the entire suspension system. Rule out nothing," she said. "And I want a detailed report before tonight." Both men nodded, backing out of the room upon seeing her resolute look. After they left, Serafina sat down again. Archie was still asleep. She crossed her arms, silently contemplating every event in the workshop. What Archie had mentioned earlier, the uneven vibrations, the misplaced wiring, suddenly became far more significant than she had thought. When Archie opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was not the hospital ceiling, but the company CEO sitting right beside him. He blinked a few times, trying to sit up, but the pain in his shoulder made him wince. "I apologize. I didn't think you'd still be here." Serafina leaned back in the chair, placing the tablet aside. "It's good that you're awake. I want to ask you a few things." Archie gave a small, surprised laugh. I just did what I thought was necessary. Before the incident, did you notice anything unusual?
Archie was silent for a moment, seemingly organizing his memory. Yes, a section of wire was misplaced, and the vibration from the suspension mechanism wasn't up to standard. I found it strange, but everything happened before I could check it thoroughly. Serafina raised an eyebrow, listening to every word. This was exactly what the technical team had failed to report properly. Where was the wire misplaced? Near the main hook. I suspect someone changed something without logging it. She immediately noted it on her phone, her eyes sharp. Archie's description was clearer than any report she had read. He didn't use complicated jargon, but saw the event in a way no one on the technical team did, the way of someone who understood the system from its roots. I want to cover your medical expenses. You saved my life. Archie gently shook his head. I saved you because I would have done the same for anyone in that position. I don't want anything extra. The statement made Serafina pause for a few seconds. She was accustomed to people trading an action for a benefit, yet this man refused a reward, despite likely needing the money for his daily life. This made her think about him more deeply. Upon leaving a hospital, Serafina received an urgent call from the office. The board of directors wanted an in-person meeting about the morning's incident. Some had already heard the news and were starting to worry that Project Helios might be delayed. She stood outside the hospital entrance, took a deep breath, and stepped into the car, her mind immediately turning to the responsibilities awaiting her. In the evening, Archie arrived at his apartment in Queens. As soon as he opened the door, Audrey ran out, pulling his hand inside. "Does it hurt much, Dad? I see the bandage." "It's nothing," Archie said, forcing a smile to reassure her. He gently stroked her hair. "It's just a little scrape." But Audrey still looked at him for a long time, her eyes reflecting the worry she tried to hide by turning to retrieve the half-repaired robot kit. The apartment was small, but full of life of father and daughter. Robot blueprints taped all over the walls, small mechanical models on the study desk, and a kitchen corner where he always had some electrical tools he was fixing for the neighbors. Archie placed his toolbox on the table, sat down, and carefully removed the protective dressing to let his shoulder breathe. Audrey placed a glass of water next to him, then sat in the chair opposite as if waiting for a story. On the other side of the city, Serafina sat in her quiet office, reopening the entire facility system map. She reviewed every diagram, comparing every detail with Archie's words. When she zoomed in on an old data log, she realized that at several points the suspension system had reported a slight deviation, but it was marked as insignificant. This led her to suspect the technical team's overconfidence or that something had been intentionally overlooked. She scheduled a request for the safety department to submit full maintenance reports for the past 3 months. Although it was late, she still had many unanswered questions. For the first time in years, she felt a clear unease run through her chest, but this time it wasn't just about an incident in the workshop. It was because someone outside the technical team saw things that the entire crew had missed. In Queens, Archie opened his toolbox and took out the small technical notebook. He reviewed every line he had written just before the accident. A few symbols made him pause, tilting his head in thought. He realized the uncomfortable feeling that morning was not due to normal slight system vibrations. There were many small scattered signs, but they combined to form a chain. He straightened up, turned to a new page, put his pen down, and began to rewrite all the abnormalities he could recall. Every stroke of the pen was part of a bigger question. What really happened in the workshop that morning? And in the warm yellow light of the small apartment, the story began to take a step forward that neither he nor Serafina knew where it would lead them. The morning in Queens began with the small footsteps of Audrey running around the dining table. Archie tied her shoelaces, gave her the usual instructions, and took her to school. Returning to the apartment, he hung his jacket on the chair, put the lunch he had prepared into the refrigerator, and sat down at his small workspace. The notebook from the previous night was still open, the corner of the paper slightly curled from flipping through it too many times. Archie pulled the pencil closer, beginning to compare the data he had recorded with the equipment description provided by the facility. After a few minutes, he frowned. Some parameters did not match. The vibration speed of the hook assembly deviated from the standard in the documentation. The tension of the hanging wire was also not the same as what he had measured on site. He underlined the 2 lines and leaned back in his chair, contemplating. The feeling of unease from the morning of the accident gradually returned. Meanwhile, at Whitmore headquarters, Serafina stood at the head of the large conference table, her hands resting on the glass surface. On the screen behind her were the sensor data logs from the previous week. "I want to see all data from the first day of testing," she said. The engineering team looked at each other, some flipping through documents, others avoiding her gaze. The atmosphere in the conference room became suffocating as they admitted some data had disappeared or been overwritten.
An engineer stood up, his voice hushed with worry. Someone edited the inspection schedule, but the system didn't log the name. Serafina turned, her gaze cold and focused. Track down the entire access history, minute by minute. No one objected. Those present clearly understood what she was suspecting. While the entire headquarters was tense, Archie received a text message from the workshop manager. "If you're free, could you drop by to fix a small electrical fault in the facility? Just 15 minutes. Archie looked at his shoulder. The wound still hurt, but wasn't debilitating. He grabbed his notebook, put it in his jacket pocket, and decided to go. The urge to re-examine the accident area made it hard for him to sit still. When Archie entered the workshop, a few staff members looked surprised. "Thought you were still on sick leave." "I'm fine now. Just here to check a few things," Archie replied, then walked straight to the old suspension area. He stood beneath the hook assembly that had fallen, looking along the crane and the locking mechanism. It took him only a few seconds to find what he was looking for. On the locking plate, there was a scratch mark that went against the normal maintenance procedure. A section of the metal surface was slightly scraped off, clearly not due to operation, but because someone had tampered with it right after the previous maintenance shift. Archie placed his hand on the frame, carefully observing every detail, pressing his lips together as if putting together the first pieces of a larger truth. From a distance, the even sound of high heels echoed. Serafina appeared with 2 senior managers. She walked straight over, her gaze stopping exactly where Archie was inspecting. "Did you find something?" Archie pointed to the deviation on the locking mechanism. "This spot was adjusted recently. It's not from machine operation. There are tool marks." The 2 managers reacted immediately. "No one could have interfered without authorization." Archie didn't turn around. "This scratch mark is not part of the facility's procedure. If you'd like, you can cross-reference it with the maintenance records." Serafina raised her hand to signal. "Let him speak." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to silence both managers. As Archie continued, Serafina closely observed every point he indicated. She bent down, using her finger to sweep away a small folded maintenance slip lying beneath a block of components. The paper was hastily folded, with no signature or notes. It was a silent piece of evidence, but enough to make her stand straight and issue an order. "Lock down the technical storage. Check all records for the last 3 months." The team members immediately left. The only remaining sound in the workshop was the low hum of machinery. Serafina pulled out her phone, asking the security department to send the facility access badge history for the past 48 hours.
When the data appeared, she saw an access record at a time that did not belong to anyone's shift. "Whose badge is this?" The security staffer quickly replied, "A temporary badge issued to the executive assistant department, no shift scheduled for the evening." Serafina looked at the access timeline. The night before the accident, someone entered the facility. She was about to say more when a workshop staffer ran in, his voice urgent. "The suspension control system is showing a deviation signal, exactly like the morning of the incident." Serafina turned immediately. Archie also stepped forward, his sense of alarm rising quickly.
"Lead us there," she said. They ran together down the long corridor of the workshop, hearing the warning sounds begin to blare as they ran. Red lights flashed continuously on the ceiling, reflecting onto the steel floor. When they reached the control area, all three saw the monitor flashing incessantly, and the system was vibrating slightly in a rhythm very similar to the previous time. The alarm sounds grew insistent as Serafina and Archie approached the control area. Technical staff were crowded around the console, their faces strained. The screen flashed continuously, and the vibration graph oscillated beyond the allowed limit, forcing the data attendant to use both hands to try and maintain composure amidst the rising numbers. Serafina walked straight to the console, her eyes quickly scanning the indices running on the screen. "Why is this system vibrating like this? Who authorized this test run?" The lead engineer struggled to steady his voice. "We didn't start it. The system is running itself." That answer sent a chill down her spine. Archie stood immediately to the right of the console, his hand placed near the emergency stop button. He looked over the entire control interface, quickly spotting what made him uneasy.
"Look here," Archie said, pointing to a line of code mixed into the command list. Serafina leaned down. The strange line of code appeared in the automatic testing section, but did not match today's scheduled run. "Stop the system." The attendant immediately entered the command, but the screen reported that it could not be executed because the processing authority was being overridden. Archie leaned over, trying manual operation. No immediate command received. There is another command overriding it. The entire control room seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Serafina understood the severity of this. A blocked control command meant someone was adjusting the system from another point, or an automated script was running in the background, the only way for the system to operate on its own without the staff knowing. "Lock down all remote access," she ordered. An engineer opened the permissions panel and began disabling the access lines. But as he did so, he paused due to an anomaly. A command was activated from an internal account, the Executive Assistant Department's account. Serafina tilted her head slightly. "Account name?" The engineer pressed a few keys. The name appeared clearly. Clinton Rhee. No one dared to speak. Clinton, the person who closely managed her daily schedule, who held more sensitive information than anyone in the building. A thought raced through Serafina's mind, but she pushed it aside to focus on the immediate situation. "Cut the access immediately," she said. While the technical team worked, Archie crouched down to examine a section of wiring near the base of the mechanism. He gently pulled back the protective wrapping, lifted a small corner, and pointed out two green wires placed out of standard sequence. "This is changed too," Archie said, "the same as that morning. Someone tampered with this suspension system." A staff member immediately objected upon hearing this. "It's impossible for a stranger to enter. Our security system—" Serafina cut him off. "Don't make any assertions without checking." The warning sounds suddenly lessened. An engineer away from the console announced, "The system just self-disconnected from the internal network for a few seconds, right before we locked the access." The entire room fell silent. Disconnecting just as it was about to be blocked, only the person interfering would do that. Someone was watching their every step, even adjusting to the pace of the control room. "Call the IT team down here. Bring full analysis equipment." Less than 5 minutes later, the IT team appeared, carrying analysis equipment boxes as if entering a secret investigation.
They connected directly to the system and immediately detected a strange file running in the background. This file is copying operational data to secondary storage. Someone is trying to steal the entire Helios data. Serafina stood up straight, a cold feeling running down her spine. This was no longer a random incident. This was intentional. Archie sat down next to a bundle of wires, pulling out a small cable and comparing it with the technical diagram. Data cannot be sent out unless this transmission line is modified. Someone has made changes at the server area. The IT team immediately pulled up the server area access log for the previous night. They scrolled to the bottom of the list and found an after-hours entry within the time frame that only senior personnel could badge into. This is the badge ID. It is not on the overnight shift list. The badge name appeared. Clinton, temporary badge. Serafina stood still, but the expression on her face changed significantly. She had signed the order to deactivate this temporary badge months ago, because the temporary staffer was no longer using it. Why was it reactivated? Who activated it? And why was it used the exact night before the accident? Before she could ask the next question, a workshop staffer ran in. The equipment storage area is showing unauthorized activity lights. No one is allowed in there at this hour. Serafina exchanged glances with Archie. Something in the storage area was being operated manually or by a device that had been pre-installed. If so, the person behind this had gone further than she thought. "Go," she said curtly.
They both left the control room, traversing the long corridor leading to the storage area. The sound of machinery echoed from afar, steady and continuous. Red lights in the storage area flashed rhythmically, casting an unusual glow on the floor. Archie walked close beside her, his hand near the pocket containing the technical notebook. All the details he had suspected were now gradually becoming clear. They had just turned the corner of the corridor when the sound of the machinery inside the storage area suddenly intensified. Serafina said nothing more. She pushed straight through the half-glass door of the coordination area and stepped into the zone of flashing red lights. When they reached the storage area door, the light inside was still bright. The sound of the operating machine was clearer, its rhythm unlike the normal testing procedure. No one was on duty. There was no work schedule, yet the equipment was operating as if it had been set up beforehand. The storage room door remained motionless before them, the magnetic lock system still illuminated as if it had been manipulated just a few seconds ago. The indicator lights flashed steadily, not matching the shift time of any employee. A workshop staffer stood nearby, his face still bewildered, quickly explaining, "No one touched it. I've been standing here since I started my shift. I haven't seen anyone go in or out." The statement made Serafina slow down for a moment. No one touched it, yet the system clearly showed a command to open the door. This only happens when the command is sent from an account with higher privileges. Archie crouched down to the control panel mounted next to the door, his finger tracing the timestamp. He stopped. Someone entered the code less than 5 minutes ago. This access privilege, he tilted his head to look closer, belongs to the senior executive office. The group standing nearby paused for a few seconds. Serafina said nothing more. She just scanned her CEO badge over the reader. The door opened with a soft click. She stepped in first, followed by Archie. The atmosphere inside the storage area was completely different from the hallway outside. Machinery was operating, the sound of fans, the thick whirring of data running through processing circuits. The Helios test system was in automatic run mode. A warning line appeared on the screen nearby. Unsupervised test run, high risk. "There's no schedule for this system to run today," Serafina said softly, as if just confirming it to herself. A secondary server to the right of the room was blinking a signal. A green light flashed in short cycles, contrary to normal operating mode. Archie knelt down, looking at the data port below.
"There's a strange connection here," he said, gently pulling the cable attached to the port. The end of the cable was still warm, indicating it had been used very recently. Right beneath the server rack was a small device, half the size of a hand, with a corner of its plastic casing peeled off. Archie picked it up, briefly inspected it, and handed it to Serafina. "Temporary storage device. If someone is in a hurry, they'll plug it in, grab the data, and pull it out immediately." Serafina turned the device over in her hand. They left in such a rush that they dropped this. Archie continued tracing the cables, stopping at a black wire plugged into a data port that had never appeared on the technical diagrams. He removed it, setting it next to the others for comparison. "This one doesn't belong to the Whitmore system. It's typically used to extract large technical data and send it out. Connecting it at the right moment is all it takes." The IT team arrived right then. They immediately plugged their collection device into the reader and viewed the content. One of them looked up. His expression changed. "There's a complete simulation of the Helios system in here. Someone is trying to copy our procedures." The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. This was no longer suspicion. This was evidence. "Check the building entry log for today," Serafina requested. An engineer immediately opened the record. "Clinton Rhee was here an hour ago. The system doesn't show any meeting scheduled for him." Serafina looked at Archie. They both understood the seriousness of that information. "Check Clinton's phone location." Internal security staff opened the tracking interface. A blue dot appeared clearly on the building schematic. The auxiliary office area, right next to the server room. Archie crossed his arms, his voice lowered as he analyzed. "If the goal is to extract all Helios data, the next step would be to open system access, back it up to a personal device, and then activate the simulation mode to capture the operational structure." Serafina took a deep breath. "And we are seeing all of that here." He nodded. "That person is still somewhere in the building. If they haven't managed to send it out, they'll be forced to return to complete it." This was the final piece of the puzzle. No longer were they isolated signs in the workshop or strange vibration signals. Everything connected in a way that neither of them could dismiss as coincidence. Serafina motioned for the IT team to stay and lock down the entire storage area system. Then she turned to Archie. "We're going to the auxiliary office." They left the room together, crossing the corridor that led to the least trafficked area of the floor. The silence was so profound that their own footsteps echoed clearly. When they reached the door of the auxiliary office area, the green light from the data analysis unit in the server room opposite reflected into the hallway. The server room door was ajar, as if someone had just left but hadn't had time to close it. Serafina paused, her eyes focused on the dark space within. Archie advanced half a step, standing next to her, his hand near the control panel in case he needed to turn on the lights or shut down equipment. The server room door opened wider as Serafina gently pushed it. The cool air from the cooling system wafted out, carrying the steady sound of fans and the small clicking of operating processors. She stepped in first, her eyes fixed on the illuminated workstation in the middle of the room. The screen displayed numerous system windows, each data frame flashing as if someone had just been manipulating it in a hurry. Archie stood right behind her, silently observing the entire space. He noticed a small detail. The chair in front of the workstation was slightly askew, as if the person sitting there had stood up very quickly without time to push it back into position. A small detail, but when combined with the entire sequence of events, it spoke volumes. The IT team followed a few seconds later. One person crouched down to check the still open login screen. There was an access session 10 minutes ago, Clinton Rhee's account. Serafina stood still, the white light from the workstation reflected on her face. She didn't ask any more questions. She saw the whole truth in that brief line of text. "Where was the data being transferred to?" she asked. The IT engineer quickly checked. Nowhere yet. It was only saved in the cache. The person left too soon. On another window, a list of recently connected devices was clearly visible. Serafina slid her finger, scrolling down to the bottom section. A name of a personal device had been added since last week. It was not on the official registration list. "Here," she said, pointing to the line, "find this device." Archie was still standing close to the console. He looked over a segment of code running in the second window, then said, "Open the hallway camera feed." The internal security team entered the command from their tablet. A video clip appeared. Clinton walking quickly down the hallway a few minutes ago, a thin document bag tucked under his arm, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to hide something.
No one in the room had any doubts left. "Lock down this floor," Serafina said. "No one leaves with any belongings." Immediately, the security department sent an urgent notification across the entire system. The warning lights on the wall switched to a gentle, continuous illumination, signaling that the floor was under temporary control. Meanwhile, Archie pulled up a code window for closer review. The command sequence was clearly visible, a series of manipulations to adjust the sensor signal, identical to what he had seen during the first accident. "It's the same code," he said. "This exact sequence caused the locking plate to deviate that morning." The technical team looked at the screen, their faces changing color. This was no longer an accident, no longer a coincidence. It was all intentional. "So," an engineer muttered. Archie nodded slightly, a silent confirmation. Clinton had manipulated the suspension system. Just then, the internal communication system rang in the room. "We found Clinton. He's by the emergency staircase trying to go down." Serafina and Archie immediately left the server room, the security team running alongside them. At the end of the hallway, Clinton stood between two guards. He was asked to surrender the document bag in his hand. He hesitated, but eventually was forced to comply. Inside was a personal storage device, its angular outline identical to the device Archie and the IT team found in the storage area. Its capacity was nearly full. Serafina stepped forward. She didn't speak loudly, nor did she need to show emotion. "You used internal privileges to steal Helios data." Clinton avoided looking at her, his eyes darting elsewhere. No denial, no explanation. Just silence, a form of silent admission. She signaled for the guards to hand Clinton over to the internal legal department. "Don't let him touch any more machines," she said, then returned to the hallway back to the server room. When Serafina returned, the screen at the workstation was still open. All evidence was kept in its original position. The IT team was extracting the access log file by file, preparing to hand it over to the legal department. Archie sat in front of another monitor, reviewing the vibration data from the morning of the accident. He zoomed into the graph, comparing it to the code sequence Clinton had just used. They matched down to every detail.
"He followed this exact sequence," Archie said, "to make the hook assembly deviate by just a few degrees, just enough to lose control, but not cause the system to instantly detect it." Serafina looked at the graph lines, the small discrepancies making the truth crystal clear. Her accident was not random. It was calculated. She stood next to Archie, her hand resting on the edge of the console. "Thank you," she said softly, not as a mere expression of gratitude, but as a confirmation. "If you hadn't noticed these minor deviations from the start, everything would have turned out differently." Archie said nothing. He simply watched the system gradually return to stable status under the hands of the technical team. Every strange command window was closed, automated files were removed from the process, and every piece of data was returned to its original location. An engineer standing behind them said, "The emergency mode is still on. It requires a command from the CEO to switch off." Serafina looked at the main screen. A red warning bar stretched from one end to the other, indicating the system was in a restricted state to prevent further data leaks. She took a deep breath, placed her hand on the control panel, and pressed the confirmation button. The alarm sounds faded. The red disappeared, replaced by stable blue light. The server room returned to silence, only the steady sound of the fans remaining.
Serafina stood next to Archie, both watching the system run smoothly again. It felt as if a chaotic chapter had closed, giving way to the next step, not just for Project Helios, but for the company's entire future.